The recent shooting of unarmed civilians in Gaza saw the killing of 58 and life-changing injuries inflicted upon more than 1,200 protesters by soldiers of the Israeli Defence Force, the IDF. The stark contrast between the British government's response to the proven actions of the Israeli government and the alleged actions of the Syrian government in Douma only a month earlier reveal the reality of the British government's supposed moral indignation. Speaking about the alleged Douma attack, Theresa May made the following statement only a month before her more recent statement on the Gaza shootings.
Last Saturday, up to 75 people, including young children, were killed in a despicable and barbaric attack in Douma.
So that's pretty clear then. It was a despicable and barbaric attack. Innocent children were killed, and this is something which Theresa May was keen to make clear to the British public.
Soldiers opened fire, killing more than 50 Palestinians, including 8 children.
So let's be clear here. The events in Gaza were also horrific, and children sadly lost their lives in Gaza as well.
We have seen the harrowing images of men, women and children lying dead with foam in their mouths. These were innocent families.
And there have been hundreds of casualties as Israeli forces have opened fire using live ammunition. Palestinian health officials say more than 40 people have been killed. The Israelis say they opened fire to stop any Palestinians crossing the border from Gaza into Israel.
אוי, זה סרטון! יש! בן של זונה.
So what about the people in Gaza? Are they innocent families? Are these images harrowing?
We are also clear about who was responsible for this atrocity. A significant body of information, including intelligence, indicates the Syrian regime is responsible for this latest attack.
Israeli forces responded with tear gas, plastic bullets and various types of live ammunition, some causing horrific wounds and lifelong disabilities. We stress again, lethal force may only be used as a measure of last, not first, resort, and only when there is an immediate threat to life or serious injury. An attempt to approach or crossing or damaging the Green Line fence do not amount to a threat of to life or serious injury and are not sufficient grounds for the use of live ammunition.
So that's also pretty unequivocal. The UN have got no doubt. The Israeli government was responsible. There's no doubt. So let's see what Theresa May's got to say about the shootings in Gaza.
I'd like to start by addressing the troubling situation in Gaza and the West Bank.
Language is a precise tool, and we convey meaning in many different ways. We need to look at both the content of the language used and the tone of the language used. So in the case of Gaza, we have a statement that it was a troubling and concerning event. However, in the case of Douma in Syria, we have
a despicable and barbaric attack. The troubling situation. A despicable and barbaric attack. The troubling situation.
So there seems to be a bit of moral equivocation going on there.
There is an urgent need to establish the facts of what happened yesterday.
Whilst there's always a need to investigate things properly, in the case of Douma, we saw an investigation that was based upon video evidence that was offered by the White Helmets and Jaish al-Islam, amongst other Islamist extremist groups, which the British government thought was perfectly acceptable as evidence to prove, in their mind, that the Assad government, which they choose to call a regime, was responsible for what happened. In the case of Gaza, we've got first-hand video evidence from the Israeli Defence Force, which clearly shows them targeting individuals who don't appear to be doing anything for assassination.
Israeli forces responded with tear gas, plastic bullets, and various types of live ammunition.
So that's also pretty unequivocal. The UN have got no doubt the Israeli government was responsible, but there would seem to be a parity between the evidence in both cases.
There is an urgent need to establish the facts of what happened yesterday. The Syrian regime is responsible for this latest attack.
Israeli forces responded with tear gas, plastic bullets, and various types of live ammunition.
While Theresa May didn't hesitate to blame the Assad government for the attack in Douma based upon questionable evidence, and despite the fact that the UN have clearly stated the Gaza shootings were at the hands of the IDF, for some reason Theresa May was hesitant to direct any blame towards the Israeli government, and yet didn't hesitate at all to direct blame against the Syrian government. However, the situation gets worse as Theresa May, in the case of the Gaza shootings, then attempts to blame the victims for their own murders.
Such violence is destructive to peace efforts, and we call on all sides to show restraint.
This statement is appalling. The Palestinian people were lawfully protesting, and the IDF opened fire with live ammunition, killing 58 and wounding thousands. It is not the responsibility of the Palestinian protesters to show restraint. That Theresa May would suggest this, I'm afraid, illustrates how far the British government will go in forwarding its own political agenda.
There is an urgent need to establish the facts of what happened yesterday through an independent and transparent investigation.
Israeli forces responded with tear gas, plastic bullets, and various types of live ammunition,
including why such a volume of live fire was used and what role Hamas played in events.
I think it's important here to remember that when the allegations were made of the chemical weapons attack in Douma, at no point did Theresa May question what role Islamist extremist groups like Jaish al-Islam, who were occupying Douma at the time, played in that attack. The question was simply never asked. However, in the case of the Gaza shootings by the IDF, she is suggesting that Hamas are in some way responsible. It's also important to acknowledge that certainly it does appear that Hamas were encouraging people to approach the fence, and it is reasonable to suggest that Hamas were potentially knowingly putting the protesters at risk. However, Hamas did not open fire on these people. It was the Israeli Defense Force. The evidence is unequivocal and clear.
Palestinians have the right to protest, but these protests must be peaceful.
Again, we see an attempt by Theresa May to shift the blame to the protesters, rather than blame the people who were responsible, who were acting under the orders of the Israeli government of Benjamin Netanyahu.
We are concerned that extremist elements are seeking to hijack legitimate protests to further their own objectives.
Although she wasn't concerned at all about the extremist elements that were occupying Douma, for example, Jaish al-Islam are the Islamist terrorist organisation who have perpetrated some of the most barbaric forms of execution, including throwing gay people to their deaths off rooftops. But that was of no concern for Theresa May, who was quite happy to use the evidence that they supplied to her to lay the blame for the alleged chemical attack at Douma fairly and squarely at the foot of Bashar al-Assad. However, she is concerned that extremist elements are possibly infiltrating the protesters who have just been massacred by the IDF.
And while we do not question the right of Israel to defend its borders,
it's difficult to underestimate the degree of deception in this statement. What Theresa May is suggesting is that the Israelis were justified in feeling that their border was under attack. The Green Line fence consists of two parallel fences. There's one fence on the Israeli side and another fence on the Palestinian side. In between the two fences, there's a line of no man's land. The Palestinians were protesting on the Palestinian side of their fence. The Israeli Defense Force was positioned on the Israeli side of its side of the fence. Even if the Palestinians had managed to damage or tear down their side of the fence, they would have still had to breach no man's land, presumably under a hail of bullets from the IDF, before reaching the Israeli side. At no stage did Israel ever actually face any threat to its border.
The use of live fire and the resulting loss of life is deeply troubling.
So just deeply troubling and not
A despicable and barbaric attack.
What Theresa May appears to be doing is offering an apologist excuse on behalf of her ally, the Israeli government, for a massacre of innocent Palestinians in Gaza. Not only is she averse to laying any direct blame for the atrocity with the Israeli government, she has also been at pains to try and suggest that the Palestinians themselves were responsible for being shot. However, it isn't just in regard to culpability for the events that took place in Gaza that Theresa May's statement on the Gaza shooting seems strangely at odds with the previous statement that she gave in regard to the alleged chemical weapons attack in Douma.
Any attempt to hold the perpetrators to account has been blocked by Russia at the UN Security Council, with 6 such vetoes since the start of 2017. Just this week, the Russians vetoed a draft resolution that would have established an independent investigation into this latest attack.
As we know, Theresa May believes
there is an urgent need to establish the facts of what happened yesterday.
She's completely neglected to mention the fact that the United States have used their veto to block any investigation of the events in Gaza.
America used its veto power again to shield Israel. It blocked the adoption of a draft UN Security Council resolution that would have demanded an independent investigation into the latest killing of Palestinian protesters.
There is an urgent need to establish the facts of what happened yesterday.
America used its veto power again to shield Israel.
The Russians vetoed a draft resolution.
America used its veto power again to shield Israel.
Following the alleged attack in Douma, the British government felt that a military response was required.
We agreed that it was both right and legal to take military action, together with our closest allies, to alleviate further humanitarian suffering.
However, in the case of the massacre of Palestinians, Theresa May's government believe
it is in everyone's interest for peace and stability to prevail in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. We agreed that it was both right and legal to take military action. It is in everyone's interest for peace and stability to prevail in Israel to take military action. And what role Hamas played in events. The Syrian regime is responsible for this latest attack.
Israeli forces responded with tear gas, plastic bullets, and various types of live ammunition.
The Israelis say they opened fire to stop any Palestinians crossing the border from Gaza into Israel.
וואי, זה סרטון! יש! בן של זונה.
I am not attempting to draw any moral parallel between either the alleged Douma chemical attack or the Gaza shooting massacre. I am, however, suggesting that by contrasting Theresa May's response to both apparent atrocities, the putrid lack of morality within the British government, particularly in regard to its pursuit of foreign policy objectives, is clear. While acts of obscene violence apparently carried out by the British government's regime change targets warrant condemnation, aggressive rhetoric and even a military response, those perpetrated by the governments it defends do not carry the same degree of moral outrage. Obviously, as far as Theresa May is concerned, some lives are more valuable than others. Indeed, some lives, such as those of the Palestinians, appear to be meaningless to her. She is someone perfectly willing to overlook the slaughter of some innocents if it suits her political objectives, while exploiting the deaths of others for the same reason. Lost innocent lives are nothing other than a political football for Theresa May and her ilk. These are the statements of a psychopath.